In this alternate history, the United States doesn't survive the year after a single immigration lawsuit turns into force instead of a court ruling.
This story is fictional. It's based on real events, but everything beyond the known facts is speculation. Our goal is to explore an alternate timeline, not to rewrite history, but to imagine what might have been.
On Thursday, July 10, 2026, the Department of Justice filed suit against the state of Maryland. The target was a new law called the Community Trust Act, which limited how much state and local police could cooperate with federal immigration agents. The DOJ argued the law obstructed the Trump administration's enforcement priorities. Maryland's Attorney General, Anthony Brown, vowed to defend it. On paper, one more legal skirmish in a long war between Washington and the states over who controls immigration. Lawyers filed briefs, cable news booked panels, and everyone assumed it would grind through the courts for years. That is how these fights usually end. A judge rules, somebody appeals. The Supreme Court eventually draws a line, both sides grumble, and the system, for all its noise, holds. But what if it hadn't stayed in the courtroom? What if the administration, tired of waiting for judges, decided to make an example of Maryland by force? Imagine that instead of waiting for a ruling, the Justice Department declared Maryland's officials in open defiance of federal law. Federal immigration agents poured into Baltimore and Prince George's County in far greater numbers, backed by the argument that states were now aiding and abetting criminals. The first raids came before dawn on a Tuesday in August. Masked agents in unmarked vehicles swept through apartment complexes in Langley Park, and they did not coordinate with local police because the whole point was to prove they didn't have to. The first domino fell in a parking lot outside a construction site in Silver Spring. A Maryland state trooper, responding to a 911 call about armed men grabbing people, arrived to find federal agents loading workers into a van. Following his state's new law, the trooper ordered the agents to identify themselves and stand down. They refused. Guns came out on both sides. No one is sure who fired first. When it was over, the trooper was dead and 2 federal agents were wounded. The video was online within an hour. By noon, it had been watched 40 million times. By evening, Baltimore was burning. Governor Wes Moore went on television and did something no governor had done in living memory. He ordered the Maryland State Police to detain any federal agent who conducted an arrest without state authorization. He called up the Maryland National Guard, not to suppress protests, but to protect state residents from what he called an illegal federal occupation. The Attorney General for an emergency injunction. It didn't matter anymore. The lawyers had been overtaken. The president responded that night. He federalized the Maryland National Guard, stripping Moore of command with a stroke of a pen. But the Guard didn't move. Officers who had trained their whole lives to follow the chain of command now faced 2 commanders giving opposite orders. Some units reported to federal bases. Others stayed in their armories and waited. A few simply went home. The machine held the country together seized up. Other governors watched and chose sides. Virginia and Delaware pledged support to Maryland, while Texas and Florida sent their own Guard units north to reinforce the federal agents, calling it a mission to restore order. For the first time since 1861, armed men from one state crossed into another to fight over the reach of the federal government. They met on the Capitol Beltway. The standoff at the Woodrow Wilson Bridge lasted 6 days before the first shots. The economy cracked before the shooting spread. The port of Baltimore shut down, choking off cars, coal, and containers to half the East Coast. Amtrak's Northeast Corridor, the busiest rail line in America, ran straight through the contested zone and simply stopped. Tens of thousands of federal workers in the D.C. suburbs couldn't get to their offices. The government of the United States, headquartered in a city surrounded by Maryland on 3 sides, found itself besieged not by an enemy, but by the roads and growing dark around it. Financial markets went into freefall. If Maryland could defy Washington and other states could pick sides, then the basic promise underneath every American dollar that there was one country with one set of rules was suddenly in question. Foreign creditors began dumping U.S. bonds. The panic spread faster than any raid. Grocery shelves emptied across the mid-Atlantic as truckers refused to drive through checkpoints manned by soldiers who might belong to either side. The alliances splintered further. California and New York announced they would no longer recognize federal immigration authority within their borders. Washington cut off their funding, and overnight hospitals, highways, and airports in those states lost their lifeline. Cities that depended on Washington and cities that had learned to defy it drifted into two separate countries occupying the same map. Border checkpoints appeared between states, and travelers were stopped and asked which government they served. The chain reaction stopped only when there was nothing left to break. By the winter of 2026, the United States existed on paper and almost nowhere else. There was no single army, only regional forces loyal to whoever paid and fed them. No currency anyone trusted. The Beltway, that ordinary ring of highway, became a scarred no-man's land where troopers' name was spray-painted on the concrete barriers. Millions had fled the fighting zones. The great cities of the East Coast went dark at night to hide from drones that no longer answered to any capital. And it had all started with a lawsuit, a piece of paper meant to be argued over by lawyers in air-conditioned rooms. In a country that forgot the only thing holding it together was the shared agreement to keep arguing instead of shooting.
In this world, history went one way. But here, we ask what could have happened. If you want more alternate timelines and government what-ifs, subscribe, comment your theory, and stay tuned. This is State of What If.